Everybody. So happy that you're able to join. But welcome to our 4-year cohort live training. We're going to first get started with introductions, and I want to start off by introducing Linda Angel, who you're not going to see. She's driving for us today. You may recognize her name. She did retire last year, but she's been very gracious in helping us out with the cohort training, and so she's going to be driving for us. Along with us are Paul Higgins and Gary Gerwer. You may also recognize them. We're all data analysts at CSIS. You probably don't recognize me. My name is Alex Manriquez. I just started at CSIS in January. And before that, I was working at Santa Barbara Unified as a CalPADS coordinator, probably like most of you are out there. And yeah, so it wasn't that long ago that I was in your shoes, and now I get to be on this side of the screen. Now that you know a little bit about me, we want to get to know you. We want to know who is in the audience. So I'm going to launch a poll, and you should see a poll on your screen now. There are 4 questions, and this is just for us to get to know you and get a sense of who's in the room with us. So we're going to take a moment here. All right. I'm going to close the poll and then share the results with everyone so that we know who is around us. So the first question is whether you've completed the Part 1 self-paced training in Bridge. And most of you have, which is great. And I'll explain in a few slides ahead why that's important. But that's awesome that most of you have already looked at that self-paced, both videos. And then the second question is, this is my blank year as the LEA admin primary CalPADS coordinator. Now, there's a lot of veterans in the room, which is awesome. But if this is your first or second year, welcome to the CalPADS world. You are joining at a very weird time. CalPADS is usually very complex, but you know, adding everything else that's going on in the world, don't be discouraged. It's a team effort, and you're not alone. Question number 3 was, I was responsible for reporting the cohort data in CalPADS last year. Most of you have done it. So this is probably a refresher for you. But for those of you that haven't, this is your first year, you're in the right spot. This training is going to help you be prepared and give you all the information that you need to know about the cohort. And then the last question is, I consider myself to be an experienced CalPADS user. So most of you are right there with the, you know, you're veterans, so you're probably, you know everything that there is to know about it. So welcome back. All right, I guess we're gonna stop sharing the results now. All right, so first and foremost, we do want to acknowledge the fact that we are living in unprecedented times. And we wanna take this moment to really thank you for your hard work and your dedication as we're all trying to learn how to navigate through this pandemic and all of the school closures that have happened because of it. Thank you for being here and for still, you know, engaging with all of your responsibilities. So although we're not going to be talking in depth about all of the changes that have resulted because of COVID-19, we did want to make available to you 2 links here. They're links to that CDE has posted on guidance, resources, and FAQs. We highly encourage everyone to take a look at these, stay up to date as things have are evolving, and have those, and you know, those links readily available for you. So the pre-work, and this is what I was talking about when we were looking at the poll results. This training is actually part 2 of the whole cohort training. Part 1 were those self-paced videos. And the reason why it's important that, or we require that you watch those videos first, is because we're not going to be covering in depth here all of the process of identifying the membership or identifying outcomes for students. In fact, we're going to be using the information that you learned through those self-paced videos and applying them here on the live training, because we're going to be covering different scenarios and we're going to be using that knowledge that you learned. So for those reasons, we highly encourage that you watch those videos first so that you're really able to capture and get as much out of this training as possible. The other two items talk about the workbook. The workbook was available to you on Bridge as you were going through the self-paced videos. There was a little paperclip icon you would be able to download the workbook from. I know it says that we ask that you print it out. However, if like me, you're working from home, you don't have a printer at home, don't worry about it. Linda has got you covered. She updated the slides so that the job aids that are in your workbook are available to us as we're going through the different scenarios, so you don't have to toggle back and forth. But if you did print it out, power to you, you can follow along with us. And we are going to be referencing a lot of the page numbers on the workbook, so you're a step ahead. And then the calculator and pencil or pen are because there are some exercises that are going to require a little bit of those two items. All right, so a little bit more of housekeeping. We are going to ask that you refrain from using the chat box unless you're being asked to participate with us, or it's during the Q&A time. The reason being that we find that some users find it distracting to keep up with the chat box, as well as being focused on the information that's being presented to them. So for those reasons, we ask that you please refrain from using the chat box unless it's during those allotted times. And then the other item here is just that we're going to take a 5-minute break halfway through the presentation. So what are we going to be doing today? Today we are going to go through how the processing, the cohort processing works. We're going to go over what the cohort timelines are. We are going to go over all the cohort reports that are available in CalPADS. We're going to do some interactive activities, and we're going to close off with what we think are best practices to help you through the cohort submission process. And so our objective for today is that by the end of this training, along with the self-paced videos and the workbook, you're going to be able to walk out of here being able to identify the different timelines and the differences, for example, between the processing window and the graduation window, that you're going to be able to determine a student's outcome based in the student's cohort membership year, that you're going to be able to calculate a student's cohort membership year, as well as be able to calculate their graduation rate. And then you're also going to be able to analyze the reports and analyze the calculations. And then lastly, you're going to be able to utilize and identify all the different tools that are available to help you and your data team through the cohort submission process. On this slide, we have a visual of the bottom line. And it is quite literally that bottom line on that 15.1 report that shows us the graduation rate. And that's ACGR, as you may know, stands for Adjusted Cohort Graduation Rate. And this whole training is going to cover how we get to that number and what that number is used for, right? The ACGR is used for accountability purposes, it's used for federal reporting, and we're going to walk you through all of that. So first, we're going to talk about the process and the timelines. And the first thing you need to know is that the processing window has already started. It started back April 13th, which is about a month ago now, and it's going to go until August 28, 2020. And it's a nightly process, and we're going to walk you through what that looks like in CalPADS. So basically, the information is stored in the CalPADS ODS table, and the data is pulled from there on a nightly basis to generate your cohort reports, like that 15.1 that we just saw in the previous slide. The expectation is that you, the LEA, are reviewing those reports consistently and validating that the data on those reports are accurate and a true representation of what's in your for your district and your student information system. If there are any discrepancies, you're going to be updating CalPADS as needed, whether that be through the online maintenance process in CalPADS or through file submissions. And once that data is posted, you're going to have to wait that nightly update to kick in again so that the data is pulled from the ODS table, and the cycle repeats itself until the reports are representing the data that represents your district. The important thing to differentiate here, this process between your regular submissions is that nightly process. When you're doing your submissions and posting data for your other certifications windows, you may have to wait a few hours, but typically you do get your reports refreshed that same day. With the cohort process, it does not matter if you post your data early in the day, you're still going to have to wait that nightly process for the data to be reflected on your cohort reports. On the screen, we're giving you different date ranges, and we're going to walk you through the differences between each one of them. The first one being the cohort processing window. That, again, started April 13th, 2020, and it goes until August 28th, 2020. That means that your reports are available now for you to review. And that is the process that we just went over a slide ago. And again, your reports are refreshed on a nightly basis. And the important thing to remember here is that you are able to make updates in CalPads up until August 28th. That's the last day that you're going to be able to make updates in CalPads that are going to be reflected on your cohort report. That brings us to that second bullet point. The data is considered final on August 29th. So whatever your reports look like on August 29th, that is what's going to be pulled and used for accountability purposes for federal reporting and for the California School Dashboard. Any information any changes that you make in CalPads on August 29th or after will not be reflected on your cohort reports. And then lastly, we have the cohort date range, and that goes from July 1st, 2016 to August 15, 2020. That is the 4-year range that the data is pulled, and I'm talking about enrollment, program data. It's used to determine membership and outcome information for your cohort data. On this screen, we just have a different visual of the process. Again, we just want to reiterate, the processing window has already started. Your reports are available for you to review now, and you are able to make changes up until August 28th of this year. The data is going to be final on August 29th, which means that any data that you change in CalPads on or after August 29th will not be reflected on your reports. So now that we've gone over all that, it's time for a pop quiz. And on your screen, let me see. I'm going to give you a quick little 2-question poll about the process and the timelines, just to make sure that the information has sunk in. So let's see, question number 1 is, what happens to your cohort report if you make changes on August 29th? And the correct answer is that after nightly processing, the reports are going to remain the same, right? The last day for you to make changes in CalPads is August 28th. August 29th, the data is final. Any changes you make on August 29th will not be reflected on your cohort reports. Question number 2 says, how soon can you start evaluating your cohort reports? And most of you got it right now. You can start looking at the reports right now. The nightly process has started already, and it is going to continue up until that August 28th date. So great job, you guys. We're going to stop sharing the results and move on to identifying student membership. Now, again, as I mentioned, we're not going to go in depth about the process of identifying student membership because you've covered it through the self-paced video. However, we did want to talk about the 3 basic rules that we have to remember about identifying student membership. First one being, we need to locate the first instance of the student's high school enrollment. So what is a high school enrollment? It is any enrollment with a grade level from 9th through 12th grade. So first rule is identifying that first instance of the high school enrollment. Second rule is verifying the enrollment status. The enrollment status needs to be a 10 primary or a 30 of short-term enrollment. Now, what's important to remember with that enrollment status 30 is that we apply what I call the 30-30 rule, right? If the student's enrollment status is 30, that means that the student needs to be enrolled for at least 30 days. If the student is enrolled for less than 30 days, then that enrollment is not valid. And so we have to go on to the next available high school enrollment, right? Now, in the third final step is to check the enrollment start date against the cohort membership job aid that you have in your workbook. And that's going to allow you to determine what the student's cohort membership year is. Now, when I talk about what is that membership job aid, it's this one. If you have your workbook available, it is on page 5, I believe. And we're going to walk you through the 2 basic steps on how to use this membership job aid, just to refresh your memory. Step number 1 is to, again, identify the first high school enrollment and identify what academic year it falls in. Once you identify the academic year and you move over to the right-hand side to identify the grade level for that initial enrollment. The second step is to match the color of where that grade level falls and match it to that the color blocks on the right-hand side, and that's what's going to tell you what academic year the student membership belongs to. Easy peasy, right? So we're going to test your knowledge. We are going to get to the fun part with the interacting. So if at this point you've been multitasking or you're just daydreaming, it's time to zone back in. We're going to be asking you to interact with us. We're going to go over 3 case studies. I'll go through the first one with you, and then I'll leave you alone for the other 2 case studies. But if you wanted to follow along on your workbook, these are on pages 6 through 8. And we're going to start off with Monica Geller. So I'm going to read this one, and we're going to walk through it together. Monica Geller was an exceptionally gifted student. On top of maintaining a 4.0 GPA, she also managed to complete the culinary pathway at her high school. She enrolled in the 9th grade in September 2016, and she took advanced classes and did all the extra credit assignments. She was able to meet Lincoln High's graduation requirements and graduated in June 2020. So the question is, what is Monica's membership year? So we have here a handy dandy membership job aid. So if we remember our 3 basic rules, rule number 1 is identifying her initial high school enrollment. In this case, the first high school enrollment is that grade 9. And we go on to rule number 2, which is what is her enrollment status? It's primary, so it automatically qualifies, right? So we need to identify what the academic year is. Her start date is August 16, 2016, which puts her in the 16-17 academic year. We go on to our job aid, 9th grade, leaves us in the blue. If we match the blue color over on the right-hand side, puts us in 19-20. So Monica's membership year is 2019-20. Easy enough, right? Most of your students are probably going to fall within this scenario, right? Most of them are going to start off in 9th grade, stay there for the 4 years, no changes. So this is probably going to be your usual scenario for your students. But we're going to make things a little bit trickier for you in the next 2 cases, just to test your knowledge. So we're going to go on to case study number 2 with Phoebe. We're going to give you a few moments so that you can identify Phoebe's membership year. And there's the job aid. Remember the 3 rules, and in a moment, I'm going to shout out academic years, and I want you to raise your hand once you hear the academic year for Phoebe. All right, off you go. I feel like that's probably enough time. All right, so again, I'm going to shout out the academic years. Once you hear the academic year for Phoebe, raise your hand on the participants panel. So raise your hand if you think that Phoebe's membership year is 17-18. Okay. Just gonna scroll through here. Very good. Now raise your hand if you think that Phoebe's membership year is 18-19. Okay, more hands. All right, Now raise your hand if you think that Phoebe's membership year is 1920. A lot more hands. All right, so the correct answer is 1920. So let's walk through why that is. Again, remembering our 3 basic rules. Phoebe's initial high school enrollment is that 9th grade, right? Second rule is the enrollment status. That's a 30. Our rule of 30-30 kicks in. How long was Phoebe enrolled? And it was only for 15 days. So that enrollment does not qualify, right? Because the 30-30 means the student needs to have been enrolled for more than 30 days. So then we go on to the next available high school enrollment, again a grade 9. Enrollment status is primary, so automatically qualifies. We go on to the start date, which puts us in 16-17 school year. 16-17, 9th grade, puts us in the blue, and blue is 2019-20. So if you did 1920, congratulations, you get to brag to whoever you're in quarantine with that you know how to identify students' membership year. We're gonna go on to our third study. Case study is good old Gunther. This picture always makes me smile and I don't know why. So again, we're going to identify Gunther's membership year using our membership job aid. This time, whenever you identify Gunther's membership year, we're going to ask that you write it in the chat box. Go for it. You guys are fast. We're already getting a lot of answers. All right, it's a lot of 18-19. I've seen a couple of 17-18s. All right, let's go over the process, shall we? So again, first rule, identify the first high school enrollment, which is grade 9. Enrollment status is 10, which qualifies. The start date is September 19, 2015, which puts us at 15-16 academic year. 15-16, 9th grade puts us in the green. And green is 18-19. Congratulations, everybody that put 18-19. You got the right answer. And the trick here is that it does not matter how many times the student goes in and out of different grade levels. The initial high school enrollment is what's going to determine the student's membership cohort year. Good? Now we're going to move on and we're going to answer any questions that you might have on the membership. If there are any, go ahead and write them on the chat box. So Jamie asks, if a student graduates 5th year senior, we won't get credit for them as a graduate. We're going to cover that in the next couple of slides. And Susan asks, how to determine a membership of a student who drops out of cohort and then returns. So the student's initial high school enrollment is what's going to determine the year, their cohort year, their membership year. So it does not matter whether they dropped off or not. That initial high school enrollment is still what's going to determine the 4-year period that they're expected to graduate. I think I'm going to pass it along to Paul since there's not a whole ton of questions. And Rosario, we are going to be covering the still enrolled question in the next few slides. So Paul, are you?
I am here.
Ready? Awesome. Sending it off to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Alex, very much. I have to say that, even after doing this training for, I think this is our 3rd year, I always learn something going through this. So it's just, I appreciate you being able to go through that so quickly like that. Now, we're going to take everything that Alex just talked about, all of the membership income, membership qualifying information, and we're going to take that and we're going to move 4 academic years down the road to talk about outcomes. That's the other half of cohort. If you think about membership as the one side of the box, Outcomes are the other side of the box, and you just create a box. It's a 4-year encapsulated box. So right now we're going to talk about the other end, outcomes. And as we get started, as Alex discussed, I'm going to trust that you have either done the pre-work, know where to find the pre-work, and are willing to do the pre-work. So we're going to go through and just ask 3 really quick questions in the next 3 slides that are for your edification to make sure that you understand the outcomes video that we did. Now that video was done last year, and we did not redo it this year. The concepts inside of it remain constant, just the dates may be 1 year lagging. But going through that, let's go ahead and answer these 3 questions for you. Or you can answer them for me, but obviously we're not going to be scoring them or anything else. So what determines the academic year that the cohort outcome is reported? Is it when the student leaves school for the last time, when the student earns a completer status, the student's cohort membership, all of the above or none of the above? So based on what you have learned, what do you think that is? And the answer is C, the student's cohort membership, because that, again, creates the opening, that initial qualifying enrollment gives you the membership for the cohort, which won't change, okay? And then you have 4 years, the student has 4 years to complete. That's it. That's what the cohort is. So let's go on to question number 2. The last date to perform data entry for the 2019-2020 cohort and have it included in the cohort is it Census Day, June 30th, 2020, August 28th, 2020, August 15th, 2020? And Alex has mentioned it a few times. There were a couple slides before, so the answer is August 28th, 2020. Any changes that you put into the ODS after that, they'll be in the ODS. They will never appear on your 15.1 or 15.2 cohort reports ever, okay? So moving on one more time. Last question. Cohort outcomes are determined using what? Is it the final exit coding in your SIS for the 2019-2020 academic year? The last exit coding located in CalPads? Federally mandated quotas? Or the last exit coding in CalPads dated on or before the end of the cohort? And the answer is D, the last coding in CalPads dated on or before the end of the cohort. And that means, well, let's just move on. I think we all know what that means. So what we're seeing on the screen right now, as indicated by the little toolbar icon or tools icon in the top left corner, is a job aid. And this job aid is included in your workbook. And I think it's on page 10 or 11, I don't recall which. And it is designed to help you determine the student's outcome. And just the real quick top to bottom on it is that on the far left-hand side, you have all of the buckets, the potential outcomes for students in the cohort that are described on the 15.2. The next column over is the exit coding that qualifies them to fall into that bucket. And the description for it, of course. Down the middle of the screen, you see a big black bar, and that's dated 8/15/2020. And this is to describe that this is an ongoing process. This is to describe time. Okay, so when you exit somebody and you code them, you've given them an outcome. That has to happen by August 15th for it to count. The one exception to that rule is still enrolled. And we did actually learn something late last week and early this week regarding still enrolled. And I'll describe it to you right now just very quickly. Still enrolled is the only outcome that looks for dates beyond that 8/15/2020. You have to have data entered all the information, the next subsequent enrollment into CalPads no later than August 28, 2020, or it will never show up on the reports. But the enrollment does not have to start before August 28, 2020. You have up to, any time between now and Census Day, that enrollment can start. Anytime after that, it won't. Now, this does pose an interesting confirmation problem that if you decided to try and game the system and put a 9-1 enrollment in there just to get the student requalified, the data reporting office actually has queries that run backward checks, and they will gig you if you suddenly start having a lot of still enrolled students that didn't quite make it to census day in the subsequent year. So if you put in a 9-1 enrollment and then you gave it an N470, they're going to gig you with a dropout. So don't try and game the system. This is just objective data, and we wanted input objectively. So anyway, that's your job aid for student outcomes. And I apologize for going over my little self-imposed 30-second rule, but I did want to share that extra bit of information we did find out about still enrolled. So moving on. On the screen, you see two reports, the 15.1 and the 15.2. And this is really the starting point for you, because what do you do with cohort data? First thing you're going to do is run these reports. The whole purpose of having the reports is so that way you can see your data. And I can display data left, right, and center, but if you don't understand it, it does you no good. It does nobody at your district any good if you don't understand it. So these are the two reports that you're going to be looking at for cohort, and Gary will go over these in a little bit. But that job aid you just saw is used to help decipher the data on this screen. It helps you understand how the student arrived at the outcome that they were placed in. And as Linda's showing you, with each of those little columns, there are counts in them, and each one of those columns describes one of the buckets on that of that job aid. Excuse me. So let's take a step forward and look at a high-level wireframe of what we're talking about you needing to do right now. So on the left-hand side, you see CalPads and your local SIS. Those are the data sources. CalPads is going to generate the 15.1 and 15.2. Your local SIS or your data store has to be able to generate something similar, right? So that way you have a control group. You have the data you think to be true, and we have the data we think to be true. And when you compare the two data sources in this format, you go over to the right and you see difference and anomalous data. Any differences between your data and our data needs to be investigated. That's what the purpose of working on the cohort is. You believe your student to be status A, we're stating it to be status B. We need to investigate, and that includes you, how we arrived at that outcome and make sure that all the rules are being adhered to. That's all. Let's see. Okay, let's move on. To help you get through that, we've given kind of a simplified process here. It's a three-step process that you can just walk through in any given scenario. So step one, establish the cohort membership using the membership job aid and the CalPads enrollment data. So everything that Alex talked to, that's step one. It's all encapsulated in that. Step two is, once you know the cohort membership, you know when the student was supposed to be complete. 8/15 of that reporting year, all data has to be in. So you have to locate that last exit coding dated on or before 8/15 of 2020. Okay, that's just because that's the coding that's going to be used to qualify the student for an outcome. And third, using the cohort outcome job aid, match that exit coding to the identity. Excuse me. Use that cohort outcome job aid and match the exit coding to identify the associated outcome. That should give you exactly what's on the 15.2. Now there are a couple, hinky little scenarios that come up from time to time that we'll talk to here in the case studies that we're going to do that are actually taken from real data stories that we have found over the course of time. So let's move on to our case studies. And if you have your workbook available, open up to pages, I think it's 11 for case study 4. So we're going to go to case study 4, and it's on page 11 of your workbook. If you don't have it, it will appear on the screen, so don't panic. Okay, so on the screen, we see Ross Geller. I almost called him Chandler. We see Ross Geller, and I'm going to walk you through this first case study very quickly. show you exactly what we're looking for, and then we're going to set you loose on the next two, all by your own. So case study number 4, Ross Geller is an intelligent young man with a goofy but lovable demeanor whose fascination with dinosaurs started at an early age. On top of maintaining a 4.0 plus GPA, he also played in the band with his friend Chandler Bing. He enrolled in the 9th grade at Lincoln High in September 2016. He took advanced classes and attended the local community college for dual credit at the same time he was attending a high school where he took science courses. He was able to meet Lincoln High School's graduation requirement early and graduate in June of 2019. Ross furthered his studies at Columbia University, received his PhD, and became a goofy paleontologist. I added goofy. So on screen, you see his enrollment history. So let's take a look at what qualifies him, or what membership he's qualified into. So we've got a Lincoln High enrollment in grade 9 that is primary, beginning on 9/1/2016. So that's in the 16-17 academic year, a grade 9 record in the 16-17 academic year translates to the blue column in the middle, which is the 2019-2020 cohort membership. So now we know that Ross needs to have completed by 8/15/2020. And in his enrollment history, we're going to look for the last exit coding dated prior to that, which turns out to be that very last line there. It's a grade 11, beginning September 5th, 2018, and ending May 20th, 2019. It's an E2-3100. So what is Ross? Ross is a graduate completer because that E2-3100 corresponds to the graduate completer row on your job aid. Now, I guess the takeaway from this slide that I want you to have is that look at it. Grades 9, 10, and 11. He did not complete a grade 12 year. So when is he reported for the cohort? Was he reported on the cohort in 2019? So was he reported last year, or is he going to be reported this year? Well, because they are expected to have graduated by 8/15/2020, they will be reported with their membership. That's important. Students who finished early get reported at the same time of kids who completed on time. Kids who complete late and are either dropouts, still enrolled, whatever it is, that's what they're reported as. Okay, they don't get 5, 6, 7 years. They get a 4-year. This is the 4-year cohort. We're measuring what happened at the end of the 4 years. So looking at Ross, the takeaway is if you graduate early, you're still going to be included in the cohort, your cohort, but you can be still counted as a graduate completer. Okay? So now that we've done that, we're going to move on to case study number 5, which is for Rachel Green, who is a spoiled daddy's girl who dreams of running away and becoming a fashion designer. And I would like you to take, just the next couple of minutes, and then I'm going to walk you through those questions. What is Rachel's membership and final outcome, and then just be able to explain why. Okay, so in the chat box, looking at the job aid on screen, what is Rachel's membership? Okay, coming along, coming along. All right, well, I'm getting a little concerned, to be honest. No, maybe not, maybe not. All right, so let's go ahead and look at this. On screen, what do we see? We see Rachel Green enrolled in grade 10 and as a primary enrollment on September 16th, 2017. And I apologize if I'm craning my neck. I just have 2 screens stacked top and bottom. So looking at the membership job aid, that grade 10 in 1718, what does grade 10 in 1718 correspond to? Well, it corresponds to that blue band. What does blue translate to? 1920. So very good for everybody who got that. I was actually playing with your head a little bit there to make you, never mind. Okay, so now that we know that she is a 1920 cohort member, we know that she has to be done by 8/15/2020. So we look for the last exit coding dated before August 15, 2020. And on screen, we see her history. And what date is that? Well, it turns out to be not that last enrollment, but the second to last. It's the exit coding is dated 12/20/2019 as an E230-330, which when you look over at the job aid, corresponds to the CHSPE completer, the California High School Proficiency Exam. So she did complete prior to her cohort ending. How is she going to be reported here? Well, look at the enrollment history here as well. There is a one-day enrollment dated 8/16/2020, and it's an E230-100. And an E230-100 would get her qualified as a graduate completer. But look at the date on it, August 16th, 2020, right? She is not a graduate completer. She is a CHSPE completer because of that 12/20 enrollment exit. But because she did not achieve a high school graduation or a high school diploma by August 15th, 2020, that'll never happen. August 16th is good, not good enough. One day sooner, she would have been a graduate completer. All right. So let's move on to the last case study because we all love Joey. So go ahead and go through these, answer the questions, and go ahead and write them into the chat box. I want to know the membership year and his final outcome, please. And to Jenny Tran and Rosario and Jamie, we'll be taking questions here at the end in a minute. So hold your questions until we actually go into the Q&A, please. All right, looks like y'all got the membership coming along, but I think there's still some discussion that needs to happen about his outcome. So let's look at Joey's situation here. Looking at his enrollment history, let's find the first instance of high school enrollment, and it's that first Queens High enrollment dated 9/19/2015, grade 9 primary. So in the 15-16 academic year, a grade 9 record corresponds to the green band, which translates to the 2018-2019 cohort membership. So this means that Joey had to be completed by August 15th of 2019. What enrollment transaction here gives us the last exit date prior to then? Well, that would be the third one down here. That's the 6/20/2019 T160 exit from Queens Alternative High. Okay, so if that was the last thing and he had a T160 and there was no subsequent enrollment, he would be a dropout, pure and simple. But because CalPEDS will continue to interrogate enrollment data up to the end of the processing window, so August 28th of 2019, it's going to be looking for new enrollment data. And what we see is that there is an August 17th, 2019 subsequent enrollment, a grade 12 enrollment at Queens High. So because that enrollment is dated August 17th, what does that make him? It makes him still enrolled. Okay, and that's just because his enrollment was data entered into CalPEDS prior to the end of the cohort processing window. It falls outside of the or past the August 15th cutoff date for most dates that have to be used in the cohort, but it is also before census day. So we're looking at a model of how a still enrolled student should look. All right, now he's going to be still enrolled. And then later on, you see that at the end of 2020, he did achieve a high school diploma. Will that ever be reported for the cohort? No, but that exit will be counted on the very next end of year 3 graduates report. Okay, so this year he'll be counted as a graduate completer. For the state, he will eventually end up being a graduate completer, but for the 4-year cohort, he will never be a graduate completer. All right. Now, I know that there were questions coming up here, and I would like you to start to put them into the chat box now, and we'll go through them for you. That'll be a dropout. Susie McKay, but counts against the LEA for grad cohort, still enrolled is like a dropout. Susie, you're not wrong. For the federal reporting, it's binary. They're either a graduate completer or they're not. So for the feds, it does look more bleak, but the state has actually created more buckets. They've made a more granular report, so you can see where your students are going, and that's valuable information that you need to know, whether they're still enrolled, whether they, left the state, whether they went to college, whether they, did something else. That more granular assessment of the exit coding provides detail to you for analysis. For the federal reporting, you're right. He's never going to be a graduate completer. Let's see. Susan Smith writes, if we T160 a student and the receiving school doesn't pick them up until September, will that student count as a dropout to us? Well, if the subsequent enrollment is not entered into CalPads by August 28th, 2020, then there's no subsequent data for CalPads to look at. So yes, that student would then be considered a dropout because CalPads had nothing additional to look at by August 28th. So if the subsequent school is not or hasn't data entered the future enrollment by, say, August 26th, contact them. Say, hey, I see that we transferred to you. Is that student, has they completed the registration? Can you enter that into CalPads now, because otherwise it's going to hit us as a dropout. And that way, you're communicating, and it can possibly be flipped into something that's not a technical dropout, although the feds will never see it as a graduate.
Hey, Paul, can I just jump in
Yes,
on that just real quick? Susan,
please.
I think maybe what might help too is that the date can be September 1st. So like maybe your first day of school is September 1st, but as long as you get that September 1st record in by that August 28th date, you'll be fine. I don't know if that's some of the confusion. I don't know if that helps.
Perfect. Thank you, Linda. All right. Okay, for Jamie Post, for Rachel, why did the school do a one-day enrollment later on? Should they have just left her enrollment record alone when she graduated with the CHSP? Well, they could have, yes, but there was a subsequent enrollment because she came back and finished to get a high school diploma. I think, and I don't know how a CHSP is represented in the real world, whether it's better or worse or the equivalent of a high school diploma when you're out there trying to get a job or anything else. But I think a lot of people try and come back and finish and get their diploma. And that's what happened there, was that she finished up the work, did whatever she needed to do, came back, whether it was over summer school or whatnot, and the school created that one-day enrollment just to be able to award the diploma. So for the California dashboard, the student would not be counted as a dropout. We'll talk about the dashboard here in a bit, but she's got I'm assuming we're talking about the still enrolled scenario. Still enrolled is not a dropout. Still enrolled is still enrolled. Every bucket is its own category. When we're talking about the state level reporting, every bucket is its own category. So still enrolled is not a dropout. Still enrolled is also not a graduate completer. Still enrolled means that they have come back to school to continue pursuing their high school diploma. And how it's counted on the dashboard will be determined by that exit coding, the same way that it's being reported here, except that for the feds, it's, like I said, a binary choice. Graduate completer, not a graduate completer. Let's see.
And remember guys, and Alex is going to stress on this a little bit further into the presentation, but this is your federal ACGR, and every student is counted in the federal ACGR, regardless of DAS school, 5th year senior. Every student counts in the 4-year federal cohort.
Terry Carbajal, does it matter how long they're enrolled with the LEA to count towards the LEA's counts? I'm a juvenile court school, and I'm wondering about the student that is with us for a week or two in June, and then the students placed in court school numbers. Well, for the still enrolled, the potential exists that they're going to be enrolled at another school, but they're still going to be counted on the prior LEA's counts. Because if it happens, say after, or in that window, after August 15th, prior to 8/28, and a subsequent enrollment is entered, that makes them still enrolled, but because we're now outside of the cohort window, they're still going to be reported at their prior LEA. Okay, and I hit that pretty fast. So if you didn't get that, just let me know. Let's see. Mary Masters, if it is a still enrolled situation, but with another LEA by 8/28, which LEA has student in the cohort? I just answered that well. If the enrollment is put in that 8/15 to 8/28 window, the student will still be counted on the prior LEA's counts, but they will still be enrolled, even though it's at a different LEA. And that's just the way the processing rules hit and the way that the data entry was put in after 8/15. So that's that cutoff date. All the enrollment subsequent to that, may qualify it as still enrolled, but the prior LEA is still going to have it reported on there. Question, do 5th year seniors count in the dashboard and on cohort counts? 5th year seniors, if the data was entered into CalPads on time, are still enrolled. That's their status, not 5th year senior, still enrolled. Alex will be talking about the dashboard here in a little bit, but for cohort counts, if their enrollment was entered prior to 8/28, they will be still enrolled and counted on the cohort report. Rosario, I got confused at the end of the cohort processing versus the end of the cohort period. So long as we update by 8/22 before August 28th, was to be enrolled. Got it. Okay, she got it. Someone who graduates in 3 years. Okay, Russell, just wanted to confirm for someone who graduates in 3 years, which cohort should they be part of? They will always be the cohort they are a member of, or they will always be reported with the cohort they are a member of. So if they're a 1920 cohort, they're reported in 20. If they're a 1718 cohort, they were reported in 2018. If they're 2025, they're going to be reported in 2025. Once they're a member, that won't change unless it was an egregious data entry error and you change it before the end of their specific cohort window. Russell, give me a yes or no. Did that help?
Hey, Paul, this is Angela. I think one trick that I use to help remember what cohort they belong in is think back to your high school experience and when you started 9th grade. What were you the class of? So all your rallies and chants that you did. I was class of 92, and so even if I had graduated as a junior, I still would have been a class of 92.
Very true. Thank you for that. And even though some of us don't like to think about our high school careers, that's a very helpful hint. And I'm going to turn this over to Gary Gerber to talk to us about reports and calculations. You there, Gary?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Can you hear me?
I can.
Great. Thanks a lot, Paul. Okay, so let's cover reports and calculations now. Since we've looked at membership and we've looked at the outcomes. Now what it all comes down is the reports that you're going to look at. A few years ago when we were doing cohort, we didn't have these reports, and people would need this information, so they put in a request to the service desk, and we do a query in the database and give you this real kind of spreadsheet with just facts and figures on it. So now we have these nice reports. So let's go ahead and cover the reports. We're going to go over the 15.1 and 15.2 and how to use and validate them. So there are three cohort reports, a 15.1, 15.2, and there's a 15.1 county authorizing cohort report, which is basically the same thing as the 15.1 report that the LAs use, but at the COE level. To get to the reports, you want to go to your menu bar, and you would select reports and then go to accountability monitoring reports. Now, to be able to see the reports, you want to have the SENR role. You want to have that role associated with your user account. When you go to the 15.1 report, the first thing that comes up, just like all of our reports, before the actual report comes up, you get the filtering section. Now, I recommend, first of all, running the report in the default and just get the default report. And then you can rerun it as many times as you want, of course, and you can filter on specific categories if you're looking for information. For instance, you want to see how your socioeconomically disadvantaged students were counted. You would set that filter to yes and then run the report. Okay, when you run the report, it's a big wide heading, and we've broken it into two sections here. So usually this would all be in one row, but there's different groups in here. So I'm going to go over the different groups basically and show you those. So the first section is A, and that is your removed from cohort and your promoted matriculated. And you get a count of each, but there's no rate percentage available for those. Then the next category, what we have here is marked B, are your cohort students. This is the total number of students in your cohort. Now, this is an important number because this is going to be the denominator for the calculations that we're going to be doing soon. And then the next are all those outcomes that Paul had talked about. You have all the different outcomes, and you're going to get a count of those, and then you're going to get a calculated rate. Okay, and we're going to go over that calculation. But basically, you're going to take your outcome population and you're going to divide it by your total cohort population. So you're going to take one of your C columns and divide it by B. So the C column will change depending on your outcome, but the B column, the total, will always be the same denominator. Okay, so let's go through a simple, I believe it's 3rd or 4th grade division problem here, maybe even 2nd grade now. So we're going to take your highest percentage will probably be your just your regular 4-year, in at 9th, out at 12th, graduate high school 4-year completer. Okay, so in this case, the outcome was 295, but our total population, so those other outcomes, was 312, all added up. So we do the basic division, we'll get 0.9455, multiply that by 100 to get a percentage, and we end up with 94.55%. So pretty easy calculation, but that is how all those rates on that report are determined. Now we're going to do it. We're going to do some basic arithmetic here as well, basic division. So in your workbook on page 15, or actually we're going to bring it up on the slide here as well. If you have a calculator, use your computer, phone, probably there's always one on the phone. We're just going to do some simple arithmetic. And then when you get the answer, just go ahead and put it in the chat box as we go through each one. The first one I'll do, just to make sure it's clear. So at this district, there's CSIS High School. CSIS High School, they have total cohort students is 527. Now remember, that's your denominator. And then for their regular high school diploma graduates, 515. So we're going to take 515, divide it by 527, and then we'll get this answer, 97.72, yes. Yes, it's pretty simple division. Okay, so go ahead and do the next one for capital High and put the answer in for that one. Namarda, very quick. Very good. That is the answer, 96.83%. And now it's a tricky one here. your MPS school, you have 5 cohort students total. You didn't have any in the 4-year graduate with diploma, but you may have had some in a different category. So what would the rate be for this school? What's 0 divided by 5? 0. Very good. I'm kind of rushing through these because we are a little bit behind too, and it is pretty simple. Okay, go ahead and do the total. What would your total be for this district? That's correct, 96.82. Very good. So you guys are pretty good with your division. Okay, so let's move on to the next. Okay, now we'll go on to the 15.2 report. Now this is your student detail report. You're going to get your filter sections. Same thing here, you can run it or you can filter on your specific groups. Okay, the thing that's important about these groups is you have your student groups, and then we have a record type. So what records are you putting in that gets this information into CalPATS? But the important thing to know is there's a time period here. So for your student groups, your socioeconomically disadvantaged, migrant ed, English learner, students with disabilities, foster youth, and homeless. You may show those being counted on your report. The thing to know is any record from any LA or school where this enrollment and program span the cohort period will show up on the report. So if you had a student that was a foster youth at a different LAA, say maybe 9th grade, but then in 10th grade they transferred you, and they were never foster the entire time they were with you, they will still show up as foster on this 15.2 report if they were a foster within the cohort period, July 1st, 2016 to August 15th, 2020. So that's, so you may see, wait, you look at your report and say, well, there's got to be a problem. I don't have these students listed as any of these programs at my school, but just know that it has to go back 4 years. So if they were at a different school, that may be the case. A little thing to note too is the foster youth and the homeless, you won't be able to see those for confidentiality reasons on other reports for other LEAs. So just note that they may show on your report. And then finally, the ethnicity, race, and gender that comes from your student information files. Those 2 categories are going to come from your most recent record, your most recent SIMF record within this cohort period. Okay, there's a new filter this year for your PSTS or post-secondary transition status students. I'm not going to say a lot about this other than there is information for on Flash 156 that talks a lot about who these students are. That will say though, they have to be on an active IEP. They have to be equal to or greater than 17 years old. They have to still be enrolled in a K through 12 school after their initial cohort graduation year. They are typically enrolled in an LA solely for the purpose of receiving services related to transition from secondary education to college, career, or independent living. And they are not taking courses that would generate credit towards a standard high school diploma. And you'll find those, here's the 15.1 and 15.2 where they will show up on to select in the filter section. This next slide is just an example of our kind of the heading of the report mapping guides. We make these report mapping guides for all of our reports, and they're a great tool or job aid, I should say, to help if you're looking at our reports and you're wondering, oh, where the heck is this data coming from? How, you know, which field in which file that I've uploaded is populated and shown in these reports. And there's also the heading parts are good because they show you the basic selection criteria that is used for the reports. And then unfortunately, I don't have an example farther down of this, but when you find a column in the report, you just count that number over of columns, and then we have what we call the call out section, which you can just line up, go to that number, and it will show you which specific field of the file type and the file type name that is used to get that number for that. So to get to these mapping guides, you would go to the user manual, and from the help menu, you just can type in the report number in the search bar. And you can do that for all the reports, not just the cohort reports, but you just type in, you would type in 15.1, 15.2, and then the mapping guide will show up for you. Okay, now the 15.2 is really wide. So we've broken it up not to 2, but into four sections here. So the first section is your general student information. This is the school name that the student was at, their SSID, student's name, gender, ethnicity, and birth date. Now the next section there are those subgroup attributes. Remember, that's the ones where they could be, if they're a yes here, it could be any time in the 4 years, even if they weren't at your LA, if they were at another LA in one of these categories, they would be counted. And then the third, and what I think is probably one of the more important things about this report, is these are your cohort specific attributes. What was their entry grade in the cohort? Did they enter when they were a 9th grader, or did they came from out of state or out of country and started as a 10th or 11th grader? What was their entry year in the cohort? What was their category? What's their enrollment status? Were they a 10 or 30? What was their enrollment start date, exit date? What was their exit reason? And their completion status. So if you're finding discrepancies in your report, you look at this and see, well, wait a minute, that's not the right exit reason or completion status for the student. That's why the student's being counted wrong, or those are the wrong dates. So this is a real helpful section. And then the final fourth is your completer specific attributes. These are used for your college and career indicators, your CCIs on the dashboard, and that's your seal of biliteracy, UC, CSU requirements, workforce readiness, and the rest of those listed there. So you might ask, how can you use these reports now? My students haven't graduated yet. I'm not even sure what we're doing this year, but you can start using these. They've been running since April 13th. You can start using these right now to verify other things and be prepared for when you do graduate all your students out, but you can get things kind of accomplished now. That will help it and speed up the process so that you're not trying to certify end of year and 1, 2, 3, and 4, and also make sure your cohort's right. If you can get everything in line, make one part easier, it's a lot better. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to take a look at the 15.2 report and just kind of show you some tips. So let me share out the 15.2. I'm going to stop Linda's sharing. And then I'm going to share out the 15.2 cohort report, and I'm going to hit share. Okay, so now we have the 15.2 report, and I've downloaded it as an Excel document. And along with this, on page 16 of your workbook, and I'm sorry, since I'm sharing, I don't have the chart, but there's a chart on page 16 of the workbook, and it's like a 4x4 grid with headings of outcome, what to analyze, who is your subject matter expert, and are they a 12-month employee? So I'm not going to be talking too much about that chart, but it is a job aid for you to use, and I'll kind of tell you how you can use it here. So we bring up this 15.2 report. First thing I like to do is I like to freeze these top frames so I can scroll through if it's a large report, so I can always see what the headings are, and because it is such a wide report, there's a lot of headings. So to freeze it, you just go to the views. If you use Excel, go to view, and there's freeze planes, and you can just freeze any pane up from any part where you select underneath. So if I select underneath 9 and hit freeze pane, then it will freeze everything above. And as you can see, I've already selected it, so that's not moving, but the rest of my rows are. And then the next thing you want to do is you want to be able to filter on specific subjects here. So let's go to data, and there's a number of different ways of doing this, but this is kind of a quick way. If you just go to data, select your row, and then hit filter, and then you can turn on all your filters. So let's take a look at this and see how this can help us now. So first of all, what I would do is you could start with, well, let's see who was our removed from cohort. See if that's correct. Maybe some of these students shouldn't be removed from cohort. Maybe we have the wrong exit code and we need to get that corrected. So just select your filter, select remove from cohort, hit OK, and this will list just the students that are removed from cohort. And then you can start checking their exit reasons. Are these correct? Did they really move out of state or whatever these other exit codes are, and verify that. But maybe, and the thing to know about that is anytime you have people that are leaving or dropping out, I think because of ESSA standards, you have to have written documentation on their exit reasons. So make sure everything's in place, get that all taken care of. Then the other thing to note is you might have to check with somebody. So who is your subject matter expert or your SME for this? Maybe it's your site registers, your attendance office folks. Now, the last column I have in that little chart is, are they a 12-month employee? Another reason why you might want to start getting started on this now before the summer hits. Maybe they're not a 12-month employee. Maybe they leave June 1st. And then if you don't start working on this now, you don't have anyone to contact over the summer, and then the deadline for this comes. So that's one reason why you would want to check now. Now, another thing to check, and let me set this filter back to everybody. Well, another thing to check would be dropouts. Do you have dropouts that maybe the exit reason's incorrect, or maybe the date's wrong or something? So just some things that you can check on now. The other thing is, right now, as you know, most of your students, if they're not exited yet, and why would they be if school hasn't ended yet? Whoops, the wrong category here. There we go. Are going to be still enrolled. Because since they haven't been given an exit reason yet, they're going to count as still enrolled. So once you do get to the point where they graduate, then these will go away, just so you know, and they'll come back to graduates, hopefully most of graduates or whatever other outcome they have. And then finally, one thing that we want to point out is the UC-CSU requirements met. Now here, you could say I'm setting my filter because I want to see who my yes or no's are. Well, they're all no because they haven't graduated, but to get that information, you have to upload the SCNR file and mark that flag. But it's something to keep in mind because we have had LEAs put tickets in at the end of cohorts in the past few years saying, oh my gosh, all of our students are marked no for UC-CSU requirements being met. Can we change that? And unfortunately, after the cutoff date, the process doesn't run anymore, so you wouldn't be able to change them in the cohort. You could still change them in CalPads, but they wouldn't show up as yes in the cohort. So, just something to keep in mind when you're when you are entering your exits to check this field right here. And I think that's all I'm going to say about the 15.2 report, but just these are just some things that why you should start looking at these reports now, getting some of your ducks in a row, getting a hold of staff that may have the information that you need to answer the questions if they're not going to be there during the summer. Okay, so now we're going to do a quick poll. Phoebe Buffet was homeless for 1 month during her freshman year at New York High School. She later graduated with a cohort at Central Perk High School. Will Phoebe be counted as a graduate completer in that socioeconomically disadvantaged group? And then the next question is the denominator used to calculate the cohort outcome. So go ahead and populate these. I'm seeing a trend that almost 100% of you know this answers. Or I should say 100% of those who are answering. So I'm just going to go ahead and end the poll because we're pretty much got it, pretty much consensus there. So of course the answer for the first one is yes, because no matter where she was at within that 4-year period, she would still be counted. And then the denominator, remember the denominator is the total number in the original cohort. Minus, it is minus students that are removed from the cohort, which makes sense. Okay, so I'll stop sharing those results and that. So that part was pretty quick. In the interest of time, we'll take some brief questions if there is any. If not, we'll get going back on the report because we are probably about at least 10 minutes behind schedule since we started late. So if you have any questions on the reports, go ahead and ask them now, or you can save them for the end if you want. I do see Paulo gave a tip on freezing panes to lock scrolls. Click on D13, view freeze panes, and it locks scrolls. So thanks for that. With our new environment, can our staff begin to code the UC-CSU MET indicators, or does this need to wait until graduate completer is coded? You could upload an SCNR file with that indicator met, but you still have to upload one with the exit for graduate completer. Okay, well, I think I'm going to cut it off there in the interest of time. There's usually not too many questions about the report part. And I'm going to pass it back to Alex to cover accountability. You there, Alex?
Right here. Thank you,
Alrighty.
Gary.
Okay.
All right, folks, I'm back. We're going to talk now about accountability and the California School Dashboard. So now that we know how the data is collected and how the reports are to be analyzed, we're going to talk now about how the data is used. And most of you are probably familiar with the California School Dashboard, but for those of you that aren't, just very, very briefly, the California School Dashboard is a public accountability system that contains state indicators and standards, and it reflects the performance for your schools and your district on several different measures. The data is used for various different reasons by your district, and there's calculations that happen on the back end for the California School Dashboard. And we're not going to go into detail about what those are, just because that alone requires its own training. But what we did want to give you is that link up at the top of your slide. That link is going to take you to the technical guide for the California School Dashboard. And that technical guide is going to give you all of the business rules, all of the different calculations that are used in the back end from the data that they pull from CalPADS. On this screen, we're giving you the link to the California School Dashboard. Just in case you aren't familiar with it or you don't have it saved, you have it on this slide so that you can reference it and check out your district's information if you wanted to. So we don't need to make your head spin on this one, but we did want to cover all of the different rates that are available for a district. And we wanted to show you that there are 3 different rates that are used to make up the California School Dashboard rate for your district, which is new this year. That California School Dashboard rate is derived from different sources that are pulled from CalPADS. And we're going to walk you through what those 3 are, the differences between them, and then the commonalities. So we're going to start off with ACGR, which again is your adjusted cohort grad rate. This whole presentation is about that 4-year grad rate. And it is, again, what is used for federal reporting, but it is also used to create that California School Dashboard rate for your district. What's important and distinct about this ACGR, as Linda mentioned earlier, is that that is a rate that's available for all of your schools. It does not matter whether you're a DAS school, whether you're an alternative school, a court school, everybody has that ACGR rate. And it is also the only rate that is available in CalPADS in that 15.1 report that Gary just went over. Right? Moving on now to the 5-year grad rate, which is new this year, is that it is the rate that is pulled from CalPADS for all of your 5-year graduation, for your fifth-year grads, right? That rate is used to calculate the California School Dashboard rate for your district for non-DAS schools. And currently, there is no report in CalPADS that is going to give you that rate, but it is going to be pulled from CalPADS. Then we have the DAS grad rate. And the DAS grad rate, as it says right there, is the 1-year grad rate for approved alternative schools. Now, there are 2 points that I want to make for the DAS grad rate. The first one being that the 1-year grad rate is not the same as your 1-year grad count. Those are different things. This is a rate, and it is solely for, as it says there, approved alternative schools. The second point that I want to make is that it is for approved alternative schools. So just because you have an alternative school at your district, it does not mean that you automatically get a DAS grad rate. You have to have an approved status of a DAS school in order for you to generate that DAS grad rate. And again, this report, there is no report either in CalPADS that's going to reflect this DAS grad rate. The commonality though is that they're all used for the California School Dashboard grad rate, and it's pulled from the ODS table in CalPADS, all on that same date. So August 28 is the last day that you're able to make any updates in CalPADS for any of your data in CalPADS that are going to affect your California School Dashboard grad rate. On this screen, we are giving you a visual of the DAS grad rate website. That link there at the bottom will take you to it, and you're going to be able to get more information on how the DAS grad rate is calculated and how to get more information on just DAS schools in general. So there are other data elements, as Gary talked about a little bit ago, that are pulled from the cohort data that are part of your college and career indicator. Most of you know this as your CCI indicator. So why do we care about that, right? The CCI, what's to have to do with the cohort? Well, the same students that are identified as being part of your cohort are also the same students that are going to be determine your CCI indicator for your school. So we're going to walk you through what different data elements are used for the CCI dashboard, for the CCI measure. So on the right-hand side, you'll see a check mark for all of the data elements that the California School Dashboard grabs from CalPADS. All right, and so you'll notice that it's a good chunk of them. Why does this matter? Why do you need to know? Because there's so many people that are looking at the California School Dashboard, and I can't tell you how many times they would come to me as a CalPADS coordinator and ask me, how come this number is looking like this? You know, they're either expecting a higher number or it's too high. And so it's important that you know where that data is collected. So these next two slides are going to walk you through it. On this slide, we have the first 5 data elements. And on the right-hand side, you're going to see which submission you give us this data in. And then we've also given you which reports you can use to validate that the data that you're submitting to CalPADS is true and accurate. There currently is no report in CalPADS that's going to give you a one-to-one match with what's going to come up in your CCI measure in the dashboard. So it's important for you to know where this data, how you're submitting this data, and how you can validate whether or not the data in CalPADS is a true reflection of what you're seeing in your student information system. These next 2 items are the work-based learning. And the reason why we split it out into 2 is because they're submitted through 2 different files. The first 5 are coming from your SCNR file. And then the last 2 are coming from your special education file. Okay, so it's important for you to understand that there are, even though there's a total of 7 codes that are all for work-based learning, they're coming from different areas. And so I think the main point here is not only do you need to identify where you're storing this information, but also who would be your subject matter experts, as Gary had alluded to. You need to be working as a team and knowing who you're going to be contacting to make sure that all this information is being populated correctly. So I know that we've talked about a lot so far, but we want to close off with key points and what we think are best practices. So we're going to start off with a big point that most of you probably have heard by now, but we just want to make sure that you all know that one-year grad counts are now going to be certified during end of year 3. What we used to certify for fall 1 is now moved up. And so for this school, for this academic year, you're certifying your one-year grad counts during end of year 3. Although there are no specific reports during the end of year 3, like we're used to for fall 1, we do have a filter on the 1.21 cumulative enrollment report. You're going to be able to filter on that and see all the students that are going to count for your 1-year grad count. So every year, no matter how many times I explain this, without fail, one of the administrators would always come back to me as they're reviewing their cohort reports, and they would ask me, how come this student is coming up in my reports? I haven't seen the student for 2 years, right? And so what we want to do here is we want to make a distinction between a 1-year grad count and the 4-year grad rate, so that you're able to articulate to anybody that would ask at your district why students are appearing in one and not the other, right? So let's start with the 1-year grad count. The 1-year grad count, again, is different from your 1-year DAS grad rate. Your 1-year grad count is literally just whatever happened this last academic school year. It ranges from August 16, 2019 through August 15, 2020. And it is just whatever happened this last academic year. We're not worrying about membership dates. We're not counting for years later. This is just who graduated, who didn't in this last academic year. This data is used for DataQuest, and it is now, as we've mentioned, due on the same day as end of year 3, which is August 28, right? Now, the difference from this to the 4-year grad rate is that the 4-year grad rate is, again, as we've mentioned throughout this whole presentation, based on the student's membership year, right? This is when we're talking about any student's enrollment from July 1st, 2016 through August 15, 2020. And so that's where all of this information that we've covered during this presentation comes into play. So that means that if a student's last known enrollment was at your district and then nothing happened the next 3 years in CalPADS, that student's going to show up on your cohort report. And so that is why that student's going to show up in your 4-year grad rate report and not in your 1-year grad count. Does that make sense? The 4-year grad rate is used for DataQuest as well, but again, it is what's used for federal reporting and to calculate your California School Dashboard grad rate for your district. This information is pulled from CalPADS and it's due August 28. As this slide clearly demonstrates, everything is due August 28. That is your last day to make any changes if you needed to. The dates are aligned. Yay. But what's important here is to remember that the way that you certify your data needs to be in conjunction with how you're submitting, when you're submitting your data for your cohort. And what do I mean by that? So let's pretend that you're a rock star. You have all your data in CalPADS certified by the end of June. Everything's good to go. But then come July, you get a set of students that graduated over the summer, right? So you submit that data into CalPADS, you post it, and you're good to go in terms of your cohort reports because, as we know, your cohort processing window doesn't close until August 28. So your cohort reports are up to date, everything's fine and dandy, but all of a sudden you realize there's a discrepancy between your cohort and your end of year reports, because your end of year reports have already been certified and they're frozen, right? There's no changes. So just be mindful that if you're still making updates to CalPADS, your ODS data is being pulled for cohort, but it's not going to be updated in your certification reports if you've already certified. So make sure that you're going back to your certification reports, reviewing your revised uncertified status, and then you can disapprove and reapprove. And if all of this is kind of not really making sense about the your revised uncertified status, you can go ahead and send us a ticket. We'll be happy to walk you through what that process looks like. All right, this slide was comprised based on tickets that we saw coming in through our help desk. And so we're going to walk you through some tips that we think are helpful for your cohort processing. So the first one is to review your reports 1.5 and 8.1 that talk about your grade level counts and your exits. Now these reports are from fall 1. What does this mean? It means that for next year, you don't have to wait until the cohort processing window starts. You could start reviewing these reports as early as your fall 1 reports are available. And why is a grade level important? Well, if we remember about your membership, identifying membership for the student, the grade level is the first instance of a high school enrollment, right? So if the grade level is wrong to begin with, all of a sudden that membership year is off for that student. So it's important for you to verify that the student's grade levels are true and accurate. And then the exit report, the 8.1, as Paul mentioned, the outcome is based on whatever the exit code is for that student, right? So you want to make sure that that is accurate for them as well. Then we have the SCNR uploads. Gary mentioned this. UCCSU is important, and I can tell you from personal experience, you need to be verifying this data. Your SCNR file is where you are submitting your UCCSU. There is no validation for UCCSU. So your files can post without any errors. There are no IVR errors for your SCNR. And maybe you even go as far as your certification errors. You may have 0, but it does not mean that your UCCSU data is accurate. You could have 0 UCCSUs or very, very low. So it's important that you are verifying that your data is accurate, even for files that have posted and passed without any errors. Then we move on to end of year 1. Specifically, things that impact your CCI indicators, as we just talked about. But a reminder that CTE completers, students can be identified as CTE completers regardless of how your CTE program is funded. So it does not matter how you're getting the funding for your CTE programs, the student can still be tagged as a CTE completer. And similarly, the credentials for the teachers don't matter in terms of identifying the student as a CTE completer, right? Then end of year 3, again, verifying your grad counts, your cumulative enrollment totals. The report 1.21 is very important. Again, you are certifying your 1-year grad counts this end of year 3. So verify that you have all of those data elements true and accurate. So a lot of the times by this point of the presentation, I would be asking myself, all right, I have all of these reports that I need to review. There's so many different data elements. How am I, the CalPEDS coordinator, supposed to know if it's correct, right? My job as a CalPEDS coordinator is to make sure that CalPEDS is a reflection of what I have in my student information system. But how do I even know that the information in my SIS is correct to begin with? Right? So that's where your cohort team comes into play. It is super important that you have people that are your subject matter experts that you can lean on so that you can start validating these reports as soon as possible and identifying any discrepancies. On this slide, we've given you a few examples of who you might want to include in your dream team, but it can definitely be more people or a different combination of people. This is really just to get your mind thinking about who at your district is the subject matter expert on all these different data elements, right? Who would know your UCCSU count, more or less? Who's going to know about your CTE data? Who's going to know about your exits? And, you know, make sure that you're working together and really, again, leaning on each other so that you can get the best data in there. So what should you be doing now? Our recommendation is, again, you identify your cohort team. Figure out who is going to be part of your validation process. Right now, we're in weird times, right? So you can't just pop into your coworker's office and say, hey, this number looks a little weird to me. Can you please take a look at it? So I would say maybe sending an email saying, hi, you've been recruited, you're part of the cohort team, congratulations, so that you set that expectation, right? That they're going to be a part of this, and that you're going to have to work together to validate all of these reports. And that brings us to the second item on there, which is plan accordingly. Create internal timelines for yourself. Set expectations not just about what is going to happen, but when you're expecting things to happen. Perhaps you're going to tell them, hey, I'm going to be giving you fresh new reports every Wednesday, and I would like feedback on Friday of every week, if there are any feedback, you know, something along those lines, so that you're both holding each other accountable, and you're keeping up to date with your timeline, so that you're not rushing until the last minute to just post whatever is available in CalPads. The third item here is to share what you've learned. This training is available. You can download the presentation. I believe the recording is also going to be available shortly. And we have the workbook. We have the job aids in the workbook. There are the self-paced trainings. So there's just a lot of different items that you can share with your team to be able to have them be informed about what is expected, or at least how the data is being used. And then the last point here was my personal favorite, was debriefing. For me, it was so important to talk about not just what went right, but what went wrong. Think about what data elements were hard to collect, or maybe what data elements were hard to validate, and why. Maybe you need to move up your timeline for next year. Maybe you need to tweak your process for collecting certain data elements, or maybe there's no process at all, right? And that needs to be developed. So those are conversations that you should be having with your team, so that by the next time this comes around, you're better prepared and you're not as stressed out about the submission. So there are different items that are available in your workbook. And I'm just going to briefly talk about them. The first one is the RACI Matrix. This is a project management tool. This is on pages 19 through 21 of your workbook. And this is basically a good tool to use for, again, identifying who's going to be doing what when. Then we have the cohort glossary. That is on pages 25 to 27 of your workbook. The support on page 28 is specifically CISA support, how you can contact us, ask us questions, get a hold of us if you need clarification on anything. And then the resources are resources on cohort data in particular, and that is on page 29 of your workbook. So we're going to take a few seconds here so you can solve the equation on the slide. Just kidding. This is just to reference the problem scenarios that are available on your workbook, and they are on pages 22 through 24. We're not going to go over all of the problem scenarios, but we want you to know that they're there so you can take a read and learn from mistakes that other people make, and hopefully you get to avoid them yourself. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Paul so he can walk us through our senior project.
Perfect. Thank you, Alex. And before we move on, let me just say publicly and in a just completely honest manner here, I am truly grateful that you're part of this team.
Thanks.
Now moving on, as Alex said, we are going to go into a senior project here. Now these are not in your workbook. These are just going to be online, but they are kind of pulled from a lot of data scenarios that we've run into over the years. So a lot of what you're going to see on the screen is just kind of wonky and funky, and you look at it and go, who would do that? Well, it's actually happened. So let's just go on one step forward. This is our student, Janice Hosenstein. And Janice, as you may or may not remember, is Chandler Bing's longtime on-again, off-again girlfriend who had that sinusy nasal accent, and you always knew when she entered the room because what did she yell? It was always, oh my God. So let's look at Janice's enrollment history here as senior projects, and we're going to answer a couple questions in each one. And the common questions are, what is Janice's membership and what is Janice's outcome? And then we'll also be asking a couple other small data scenario questions in third and fourth questions in some of these. So let's just go through this. And I want you to, if you have them available, have your job aids available, because you're going to need to follow the process. Identify membership, identify the last exit coding within the cohort window, and then use your outcome job aid to identify the outcome. Okay, so follow the process, look at the data, and we'll get through this just fine. So on screen, we have our first senior project. So what is Janice's membership? In the chat box, go ahead and please tell me, what is Janice's membership? About half and half. Still about half and half. All right, this one is kind of a trick question because I want you to look at that enrollment history. That first instance of a grade 9 enrollment happened on September 2nd, 2016. Is that a qualified enrollment, right? Nope, that's a secondary enrollment. You cannot use that initial line. So we have to move on to the second line, which is a grade 9 record that happened in the subsequent year, in the 17-18 academic year. So she was actually in the 2021. So very good to those of you who got it. Those of you who didn't, just remember, you always have to verify that enrollment status to make sure that it's qualified. So now that we know Janice's membership is in the 2021 cohort, what's her outcome? I mean, she's a graduate, right? Just kidding. No, okay, so remove from cohort, remove cohort. Remove. Okay, you guys got this now. Now that you understood where we were looking, you're right on the money. So let's look 4 years down the line from that 17-18 academic year. It falls into that last data row, that 8/16/2000 to 6/20/2021 exit, which is coded as a T200, which when you look at your outcome job aid corresponds to I believe it's moved out of state. I can't see it, it's too small, but it is in that removed from cohort bucket. All right. So now let's look at the homeless status. Based on what that student program data reads for that 191 record, will Janice be considered homeless on the 15.2? No. Very good. All right, I'm seeing a lot of no's. I haven't seen a yes pop up, so very good. And to answer that question, Mary Masters, will she even be on the 15.2? Yes, she will. The 15.2 includes removed from cohort students, so you can verify those statuses and make sure that you can justify those statuses and make sure that they are actually removed from cohort. So the 15.2 does include removed from cohort, so that way you can verify those students. But Janice will not be identified as homeless because that instance of homelessness occurred prior to her enrollment in the cohort window. And the enrollment, the enrollment dates don't span it, and the program record does not span it. So she will not be considered homeless. So not bad for the first try. Okay, let's move on to number 2 here. And we have a total of 3 senior projects. So let's look at the second one. And the questions are pretty much consistent. What is the membership? What is the outcome? Under what LEA will Janice report? And based on the fact that Janice was placed in a foster home while at Central Perk High in her grade 9 year, will she be reported in any subgroup categories displayed on the 15.2? Okay, so let's start right at the beginning. What's her membership? Go ahead and start typing that in the chat box, please. Very good. Yeah, very straightforward on the membership, that there was a grade 9 primary enrollment beginning September 2nd, 2014. The 2014-15 grade 9 enrollment corresponds to the yellow band on your job aid, which then translates to the 17-18 cohort. So yes, anyone who said 17-18, you are right on the money, and I don't see anyone different. So perfect. So now, knowing that she's part of the 17-18 cohort membership, what do we know about her outcome based on the enrollment history on the screen? All right. What are we still thinking? Still enrolled, still enrolled, still enrolled, still enrolled, dropout. Okay. Still enrolled, still enrolled. Okay. Well, let's look at this a little closer. So we're looking for the last exit coding that happened on or before 8/15/2018. So that happens to be that 6/2/2018 E155 exit from Central Perk Alternative High. Great. Well, if that was the last enrollment, she would be a dropout. However, as the note on the screen indicates, that there's a subsequent record that was posted on August 20th, 2018. So right before the end of the cohort window, but there was subsequent enrollment posted. And let's look at it. It's dated 8/16 through 11/20. So it's primary enrollment, grade 11. Very good. She is still enrolled because that record was posted before the end of the cohort processing window. Had that record been posted, 8/29 or later, would she still be still enrolled? No, she would not, because CalPEDS would not have seen that data. So you're still on the money. You're doing good. Now let's look at under which LEA will Janice report in the cohort. And she started at Lincoln High, right? So she's going to be reported under Lincoln High, right? You tell me. Is she going to be Central Park High, Central Park Alternative High, Central Park High, Lincoln High? Where's she going to be reported? Okay. Anybody who's saying Central Perk Alternative High, you are correct, because that is who is holding her enrollment at the end of the cohort window. If you said Lincoln High, you have to remember the processing rules, that if they transfer out of a school, they take their membership with them to their receiving school. So she took her membership from Lincoln High to Central Perk High to Central Perk Alternative High, and Central Perk Alternative High gets to report her. So very good, anybody who said that. So moving on to the next and last question for senior project number 2, based on that foster home record at Central Perk High in her grade 9 year, will she be reported in any subgroups on the 15.2 report? And if so, what do you think they'll be? Okay, so a couple people answering yes. Okay. Foster and homeless? Well, no, it's just foster because she wasn't homeless. So she'll be identified as foster. Does foster qualify you for anything else? And Belinda, you're on to it. And so are you, Jay McCall. All right, so TJ Phillips, you got it too. She's going to be socioeconomically disadvantaged as well as a foster youth, because being foster youth automatically qualifies you as socioeconomically disadvantaged. And on the slide on the screen, there's that note at the bottom defining what socioeconomically disadvantaged is. So if she was any of those things at any time during her enrollment, she's going to automatically be SED as well as that specific attribute. So good for you. We're moving on to the last senior project. We're going to try and march through this as quickly as possible. You guys are doing great. You're seeing through all my clever ruses. Okay, so last senior project, we're going to answer 4 questions. What is her membership? What is her outcome? Will Janice be included when graduates are filtered on the end of year 3 1.21 cumulative enrollment report? That's a hard thing to say for this year. And under what LEA did Janice report in the cohort? So let's start with the basics. What's her membership? And go ahead and write that in the chat box, please. All right, y'all doing great. 1819, very straightforward. She had a primary grade 9 enrollment at Central Perk High beginning 9/2/15. So using your tool, that corresponds to an 1819 cohort membership. So you are all good. You're doing great on that. Let's look at her outcome. All right. So using your student outcome job aid and using the data on the screen, including that note, when that record was posted, go ahead and tell me what her outcome is, please. All right, we're about half and half. Half of you are calling her a dropout, half of you are calling her still enrolled. So let's walk through that. So being a member of the 1819 cohort, we know that her final exit coding has to take place before August 15th of 2019. So what's the last exit date that qualifies here? And that's the Central Perk Alternative High exit dated 6/5/2019 as an E155. And again, that would, if that's the last one, then we're good. And she's a dropout because E155 with no subsequent enrollment information is a dropout, but there is subsequent enrollment information here. Let's see if it qualifies. So the next enrollment at Central Perk Alternative High begins August 16th, 2019 and goes through 12/12/2019. That looks right, right? Should qualify. Look at when it was posted. It was posted almost 2 months after the close of the cohort process. So CalPADS never saw any subsequent enrollment information. So it has to rely on what information it has at the close of that processing window, which was an E155 exit from Central Perk Alternative High dated 6/5/2019 with no subsequent enrollment. That means that Janice was a dropout. So later on, when she earned her E23100, you can definitely see that she came back and she did other things at school. So, good for her. But the reporting for cohort that will be reported to the feds will never include that subsequent enrollment. She will always be a non-grad. So let's move on to question number 3. Will Janice be included when graduates are filtered on the end of year 3 1.21 cumulative enrollment report for this academic year? That's the 2019-2020 academic year. All right, I'm seeing answers coming in, and I like all those answers. Those are all good answers. I'm very positive today because those are positive answers. Those are a bunch of yeses. Give me a yes. Yes, yes. All right. So yes, Janice will be included on that 1.21 report because she was enrolled during the 1920 academic year. And she graduated that year well within spec. So she will definitely be included and on the 1.21 as a graduate. So she will be included in that filter. Good job, everyone. All right, so last question, under what LEA did Janice report in the cohort? Central Perk Alternative High, yes indeed. All right, I am well pleased with my class here. Thank you all, you did great. Follow your process, use your job aids, look at the data, and make sure that you're doing things in a timely manner, and you will do fine. I'm going to kick this back over to Alex here, and she's going to go over some summary and information for us. Alex, can you hear me? Are you there?
Yes, thank you.
Alrighty.
Can you hear me? Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Paul.
You're good to go.
So we've come to the end. We're just going to summarize what we've learned so far. You should be walking out of here knowing what the cohort is, how the data is used, and how important it is that you maintain true and accurate data for your district and CalPADS. You should walk out of here knowing how the membership and the outcomes are determined and how you can identify those for yourself. We have now talked about this many times, but one more time we're going to say you should know that the processing window went from April 13th. It's going to go through August 28th of this year. You should know how to analyze the reports, which reports are available for you so that you can Make sure that your data is true and accurate, and that you're able to calculate outcomes and rates if you so need to. You should know all the CCI indicators, where they're pulled from CalPADS, and what reports are available for you in CalPADS for you to review. You should also walk out of here with some ideas of best practices and an idea of who's going to be part of this dream team that's going to help you with your cohort submission. Again, just to reiterate, August 29 is when that data is final. Any changes you make August 29 or forward will not be captured on your cohort reports. And with that, we ask that you please fill out this survey. It's important for us to know what is working and what isn't working so that we can adjust our training as needed. I believe we're going to copy the link of the survey on the chat box for you all. The next two slides are for your reference. They're, again, the resources and the links to contact CISA support should you need to. They're also on your workbook, as I mentioned. We are going to stick around for any lingering questions, but we've come to the end.
I'll chime in, Alex. Just to add on, I talked to Randy at the CDE yesterday, and he asked me to emphasize the documentation that's required for the students who are removed from the cohort, and Gary covered it, so I just wanted to reiterate it. And examples of the documentation were covered in your pre-work in the outcome video that Paul did. But another place to look for that is in the data guide, Appendix C. So for students who are deceased, or they moved out of state, or went to private school, it gives examples of the types of documentation that can be used. And the reason it came up is we were working with a rather large LEA that has ongoing data management issues. And
you faded out on us, or I just died. I'm not sure which.
It's good on my end.
Okay, thanks. The district has had problems with data management, and they are being audited, and among the things they're being audited for is the students who were removed from the cohort, and the CDE auditors randomly picked 8 students, only 8, and all 8 of them had 0 documentation for indicating why they were removed. And so,
yikes.
In a little bit of hot water with CDE, and so they just wanted to make sure that in training that we're covering that, and we are, but again, just emphasize that. And while Gary was going through the reports today, I was thinking, well, if I was in your shoes, that's probably one of the first things I would do right now after this training is go hop on my 15.1 and 15.2 reports and maybe pull a handful of the removed from cohort students and see, hey, in my student information system, do I have documentation for those guys? That might be a good advice for you. The documentation examples are, again, somebody asked that in the chat. It was not in the workbook, but it's in the CalPADS data guide, which is on the system documentations page. It's Appendix C. Also slide 16 in your pre-work from Paul's video.
Oh, Nimarta is asking about the exit code table. Is that the job aid for the?
I believe it's the job aid, yes.
That is on your workbook.
I believe it's page 10 because my example started on page 11. So look right around page 10 and you'll find it. And exit code 30, Belinda, is a short-term enrollment. By definition, that should be less than 30 days, but if it exceeds 30 days, it is automatically flipped through CalPADS logic to being considered a primary. So Alex's rule of a 30-30, if you have an enrollment status of 30, which is short-term enrollment that exceeds 30 days, it's considered a primary enrollment.
And Susanna is asking how we can access the workbook. It should have been part of your self-paced video training. You can download it from there. Belinda, I believe the slide that you're referring to is when we're talking about the 3 basic rules of how to identify the membership year for a student. The second rule is if the student's enrollment status is 30, then the student needs to have been enrolled in that school for more than 30 days. It's not a definition of the enrollment status, but it's more of a qualifying rule of whether or not that enrollment record is going to count to identify the membership.
All right. Thanks, Marshall. Thanks, team.
Thanks,
Good
guys.
job, guys. Good
Great
job.
job, guys.
Thank
Bye.
you. Thanks,
Thank you,
Linda.
everybody.